everyone, it's Katrina. Jack the Ripper's letters. Jack the Ripper was one of the most horrendous serial killers in history, and one of the only Victorian serial killers to be remembered and popularized all these years later. There is one piece of the puzzle, however, that most people don't know about. An analysis of 2 letters allegedly written by Jack the Ripper to the press, in fact the very letters that gave him his notorious name, were likely fabricated by journalists to boost newspaper sales. Yes, Jack the Ripper really did kill 5 sex workers between August and November in the year 1888. That aspect was never faked, as that would be something even too gruesome for newspaper executives to order. Instead, the forbidden part of Jack's history is in a letter and a postcard allegedly received by the Central News Agency. The letter was received by the agency on September 27th, with the postcard coming 4 days later. The letter was the very first time in which the actual name Jack the Ripper was used. In fact, these 2 single documents are responsible for our version of Jack. They created the character that would go on to terrorize the imaginations of many for over 100 years. But forensic linguist Dr. Andrea Nini has proved that the letters weren't written by the killer. She recently searched for similarities between 209 letters sent to both the police and newspapers in the years around the murders. She found that all of these letters, including the ones allegedly sent from Jack the Ripper, were written by a single author. The use of the same phrases, the same wording, and the same handwriting has proven that Jack never reached out to the police or the press. He was a complete anomaly who killed 5 women and then vanished. But everything we think of him is all thanks to some news reporter who was looking to drum up business for his failing paper by faking correspondence. The true story of Cleopatra's son. While Cleopatra and Caesar are pretty well-known historical figures, most people forget all about their mysterious love child, Caesarion. His history has been largely forgotten because he didn't make it. Cleopatra, or more accurately, Cleopatra VII, was the very last pharaoh of Egypt. At 18 years old, she married her 10-year-old brother, after which a civil war broke out between them, and she was forced to flee to Syria. She then met Julius Caesar, the emperor of Rome, and enlisted his help. After she and Caesar defeated her brother/husband, Ptolemy XIII, she married her other brother, Ptolemy XIV, and continued to have an affair with Caesar. And this was how Caesarion was born. It was a tumultuous time, and most people don't know all of this happened when looking back at the lovely Cleopatra. Cleopatra made her son co-ruler at the young age of 3. Biologically, he was the rightful heir of the entire Kingdom of Egypt and the whole Roman Empire. He should have been the ruler of the biggest kingdom in the world and the oldest civilization in the Mediterranean. But for whatever reason, Caesar had already declared his nephew and adopted son Octavian to be his heir, and there was no way that Romans would allow an Egyptian child to rule them. There are rumors that he was trying to change his will, but Caesar was killed before that could happen. The Romans apparently grew tired of his obsession with Egypt. In 31 BC, Gaius Octavius invaded Egypt and slaughtered Caesarion to keep him from taking the throne away from him. Using Cleopatra's own strategy, he eliminated all of the nearest threats to his power. Did you know that Caesar and Cleopatra had a child together? Or that he ruled at all, even briefly? Let me know in the comments. The Giants of Sardinia. There is a secret history in Sardinia that most people are wholly unaware of, and it has to do with giants. Beyond the crystal clear waters of Sardinia's coastline, past the golden beaches and beneath the sun's rays, the earth kept something hidden. This secret was revealed only a few decades ago in 1974. That's when the broken fragments of the giants of Monte Prama were found. Approximately 38 statues of giant stone figures were discovered broken into pieces in Monte Prama. It took nearly 40 years of work for archaeologists to reassemble the statues piece by piece, finally restoring them to their former glory. All the statues have since been put in the National Archaeological Museum in Cagliari, where they can be seen today. But there is quite a bit of mystery still surrounding the statues. No one has any idea who exactly built the giants or what their purpose was. There have been a few different interpretations of their identity. Some say they come from the Nuragic civilization of around 900 BC. That would make them around 3,000 years old, and some of the biggest statues ever carved in the Mediterranean. But it's impossible to say what they were meant to depict. Some experts even suggest they were to be copies of giant, mysterious, human-like figures that visited the region. Nothing else like them has ever been found on Earth. What do you think these giant statues were supposed to be? Let me know in the comments below. The sunken city of the Caribbean. The lost city of Atlantis may just be hidden off the coast of the Caribbean, specifically off the coast of Cuba. A team of underwater explorers from Canada recently spent years mapping the ocean floor in the area around the Caribbean. While exploring, their sonar equipment detected a bewildering number of stone structures over 1,800 feet beneath the surface of the water. They found formations that appear to be geometric shapes, perhaps carved by human hands. Some of these blocks are smooth, some even appear to look like pyramids, and all of them are grouped in such a way to suggest a sunken city. The company responsible for these findings is Advanced Digital Communications, but what's really crazy is that after they came forward with what they found, almost all information about it has vanished. There was news of it very briefly, then nothing. This has prompted some people to suggest discoveries of this nature, ones so shocking they could change what we know about the history of humanity, are being kept secret from society on purpose. Geologist Manuel Iturralde is someone who has seen the structures, even calling them extremely peculiar, and he's the director of research at the Natural History Museum in Cuba. It seems there is no doubt to the authenticity of the underwater structures, but whether this is the lost city of Atlantis, the ruins of a different lost civilization, or something else entirely, well, we just don't know. The truth of the Holy Grail. The Holy Grail is considered by some to be the greatest artifact in the world, but does it even exist? The general story of the Grail is that it was the very cup Jesus drank wine out of at the Last Supper. It was also the same cup that Joseph of Arimathea later used to catch Jesus' blood when he was nailed to the cross. But it vanished after Joseph took the cup to England. At least that's how the story goes. But here's where things get extremely upsetting for a lot of people. The hard truth is that in the actual Bible, there is no Holy Grail. The Gospels simply mention that Jesus did indeed use a cup at the Last Supper, but there was no attention given to it. Everything most of us think we know about the Holy Grail was invented years later in the Middle Ages. It wasn't until the 12th century, 1,200 years after Jesus died, that the story I told you came into existence. A magical grail was first spoken of in a poem by the writer Chrétien. Some years later, the so-called magical grail that he described turned into a holy chalice of Christ, and from here the story was born. Essentially, the forbidden history of the Holy Grail is the likelihood that it never actually existed, and that the legend was fabricated in a poem 800 years ago. What do you think? Do you think the Holy Grail actually existed in one form or another? Let me know in the comments below. Secrets of the Dead Sea Scrolls. There are still some forbidden secrets hidden in the Dead Sea Scrolls. You've no doubt heard of the scrolls before, but let me give you a brief bit of history on where they came from. In the year 70, the Romans had just conquered Judea after a Jewish revolt that started 4 years earlier. The Roman army marched through the province of Judea, located where Israel and Palestine can be found today, and extinguished every Jewish community. They also sacked Jerusalem, massacred thousands of people, tore down the Temple of Jerusalem, and looted and carried off anything deemed valuable. During this period of chaos, in which Romans stole as many religious texts as they could find, there was a group of Jews hiding near the Dead Sea in a series of caves. They wrote hundreds and hundreds of different texts on scrolls and then protected them in sealed clay jars to keep them out of the hands of the Romans. These were what we know of today as the Dead Sea Scrolls, originally found by a couple of sheep herders back in 1947. These scrolls contain almost the entire Jewish Bible. They contain part of the Old Testament and many other Jewish religious writings. The caves in which the scrolls were found had probably been used as a secret storage place for years, even before the Romans came to destroy everything. But not everything on the scrolls has been decoded just yet. Even all these years later, scientists are still struggling to transcribe all the mysterious stories written on the papyrus. The Luristan bronzes. The mystery of the Luristan bronzes is still puzzling archaeologists. These bronze figurines are artifacts from the Iron Age that were found in the Zagros Mountains of Iran. They initially captured the attention of the world in the 1930s, but were then forgotten. 90 years later, experts are still trying to figure out who made these completely bizarre figures. The Luristan bronzes were first found by a farmer in his fields in 1928. The farmer dug as many artifacts as he could out of his field and started selling them to local dealers. Word spread quickly, and before anyone could stop it, most of the artifacts had already been hoarded by museums or gobbled up by private collectors. It wasn't until 10 years later that the looting stopped and Western archaeologists moved in to do research in the area. German archaeologist Erich Schmidt was the first to take this seriously in 1938. He discovered plenty of artifacts the looters missed, even digging down into multi-chambered structures beneath ancient temples and palaces of worship. But in the end, we still don't know who built the bronze figures. The most recent estimates place them at being from the 11th century BC. They may have been made by the Cimmerians, a nomadic society from Russia. Not the Sumerians, but the Cimmerians. But we just don't know. We also don't know what in the world most of the bizarre creatures depicted by the figurines are supposed to be. The Crown of Thorns. When the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris burned in April of 2019, firefighters fought desperately to save the relics hidden inside. One of them was priceless, a relic of holy proportions unlike anything else in the world. This is the Crown of Thorns, the one placed on the head of Jesus during the crucifixion. It apparently had survived the days of the events depicted in the Bible and was housed in Notre Dame. The Crown of Thorns is described clearly in the Bible, but the Bible doesn't actually say what happened to it after the crucifixion. The relic didn't resurface until the year 409, when St. Paulinus of Nola wrote of its existence. In 530, the crown was mentioned again as being housed at the Basilica of Mount Zion in Jerusalem. This is confirmed yet again in 570 and once more in 870. The crown was such a popular item, and the thorns considered so holy, that most of them were actually plucked from the artifact and then given to important people in Europe, like the Emperor Charlemagne. These themselves also became relics. The crown eventually moved to Constantinople around the year 1063. Records show it was housed there until 1238, then handed to King Louis IX of France, and it has stayed in France ever since. What's really remarkable about this piece of history is that we actually know every move it made since roughly the year 500. What we don't know is if the crown is real or where in the world it was between the crucifixion and showing up in Jerusalem. What do you think? Is the Crown of Thorns the legitimate article or something else? Tell me your theories in the comments. Ships over Rome. In the year 218 BC, a massive fleet of ships from outer space were witnessed in the sky over Rome. At least this is according to ancient writers who detailed what seems to be an instance of mass hysteria. We may think of UFO sightings as being a relatively modern invention, circa Roswell in the 1940s. But the truth is much weirder. Famous historian Pliny the Elder wrote in 76 BC that the flame of a star's fire was seen in the sky before ascending back to heaven and transforming into light. In other words, a mysterious craft like a fireball came down from the sky, hovered in the heavens, and then vanished back into space. It happened as also detailed by Plutarch of Chaeronea in 74 BC, just before a great battle. He described the large object as appearing before the two armies in flame, roughly the shape of a wine vessel and of a silver color. As far as we know, these are the first accounts of unidentified flying objects in history, made around 2,000 years ago. The Valley of the Dawn. In Brazil, followers of the rather bizarre religion of Vale do Amanhecer, or the Valley of the Dawn, have some pretty strange beliefs regarding history. These people live in what looks like a small theme park built in the satellite city of Brasilia called Planaltina. They have a temple complex in the shape of a pyramid, a temple that looks like a spaceship, and a center for praying shaped like a six-pointed star. On the outside, they look kind of like a cult, but their beliefs consist of various doctrines seen throughout history, from Christianity, Judaism, the ancient Inca, to even the Egyptians. Here's the forbidden piece of history that really makes them strange. The Valley of the Dawn followers believe that extraterrestrial beings landed on our planet 32,000 years ago, and that their goal was to advance our civilizations. The beings have since returned to Earth periodically to help guide us. Either this is a piece of ancient history that the rest of us are ignorant about, or these people have been horribly misled. Either way, let me know what you think. The Bosnian Pyramids. An amateur archaeologist recently made the wild claim that he discovered the world's oldest pyramids. These alleged pyramids are supposedly hiding in the Balkans, specifically in the country of Bosnia. And while many experts have their doubts, Sam Osmanagic is convinced. He says the pyramids go back at least 12,000 years, to a time when a great European civilization rivaled any other in the world, including Egypt. Now, if you know about history, you'll know the dates don't quite line up. Ancient Egypt goes back about 5,000 years, Stonehenge a little further back than that. Then, when we get to 12,000 years ago, we're essentially dealing with very clever cave people. How a bunch of cave-dwelling Europeans could have possibly built massive pyramids back then is a bit baffling. Osmanagic is a native Bosnian, but he lived for 16 years in Texas, and that might account for his larger-than-life and colorful ideas. Either way, he believes that this hill, which from the outside looks like any ordinary hill in Europe, is hiding a pyramid. He believes the entire thing is a structure, rising 350 feet above the surface of the Earth. He actually calls it the Pyramid of the Moon. It stands beside the even bigger supposed pyramid, which he calls, guess, the Pyramid of the Sun. This larger quote-unquote pyramid is Visosika Hill, at 720 feet tall. The only issue is that every professional archaeologist on the planet has basically called this whole theory a bunch of crock. Not a single piece of archaeological evidence has actually been found to support the theory of the pyramids. However, the souvenir stands at the bases of the hills have been collecting a pretty penny from curious tourists. The ancient Yan Kingdom. New artifacts discovered by Chinese archaeologists at a site in Beijing are helping to unravel the mystery behind the ancient Yan Kingdom. These artifacts date back to the Western Zhou Dynasty sometime between 1046 BC and 771 BC. They were excavated back in 2021 in the Fangshan district by several different institutions, including Peking University. Archaeologists believe the relic site was once the capital of the Yan Kingdom, since they've discovered massive city walls, burial areas, and the obvious remains of civilization. In fact, the history at this one site in Beijing goes back over 3,000 years, making it the earliest known urbanized settlement anywhere in the area. From between October and December of 2021, archaeologists uncovered 5 ancient tombs, 3 neighborhoods, and over 100 cultural relics like silks, pieces of ivory, pottery, and bronze artifacts. These discoveries will help archaeologists to piece together how the first urban city in China originally formed, then how it became culturally important throughout the dynasty. All we know right now is that the Yan Kingdom appeared in the 11th century BC. Its capital was called Ji, and it later changed to Yanjing and then Beijing. The city itself has a very deep history, and archaeologists have finally gotten close to its roots. Lost French coins. In eastern Poland, a massive hoard of silver coins was discovered from 1,200 years ago. The coins were minted in the Carolingian Empire, and archaeologists believe they may have been part of a historic ransom in which Paris paid an army of invading Vikings not to sack their city. This was the first instance that anyone found so many coins from ancient France in Poland. Before now, only 3 of these coins have been found so far east, yet this hoard contained hundreds. And for those who aren't sure what the Carolingian Empire was, I'll try to explain. It was essentially France before France became the country as we know it today. Founded by the king of the Franks, Charlemagne, It included all of modern France, slices of Germany, pieces of Switzerland, and even a few parts of Italy. The coins were first found by an archaeology enthusiast with a metal detector back in November of 2020. But it wasn't until 2021 that real archaeologists went in with a team and uncovered a total of 118 coins. They were minted during the rule of Louis the Pious from 814 to 840. Coupled with the fact that they were discovered near an ancient trading post used by the Norse, it only makes sense that they were left behind by Vikings. Researchers believe the Vikings came into possession of the coins back in 845, when a fleet of Viking ships sailed straight into Paris and threatened to destroy it. To make them go away, Charles the Bald paid the invaders over 5 tons of silver and gold. Much of that silver then ended up at this trading post all the way on the other side of Europe. What would you do if you found all this treasure with a metal detector? Let me know in the comments. The Dead Sea Scrolls. A new discovery is suggesting that the Dead Sea Scrolls of Israel may have been written, at least partly, by a group known as the Essenes. As you may already know, archaeologists and scholars alike have been arguing about who actually wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls, and how the texts got to where they were found at the site of Qumran for years. It's primarily been believed that they were written by local Jews as a way to safeguard their heritage from the rampaging Romans destroying their lands. But now, some archaeologists are arguing that based on the fact that most of the scrolls were made of linen instead of wool, they were penned by the Essenes. These archaeologists say there is no way that the Jewish people fleeing from the Roman army after the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD would have had the linen needed to complete over 900 texts. The only thing that's not debatable in this situation is what's actually written on the scrolls. The entirety of the Hebrew Bible, along with calendars, psalms, hymns, and other sacred Jewish knowledge. Most of the scrolls were found in caves, with the first batch being discovered by shepherds in 1947. But some scrolls have also been found at Qumran, an archaeological site near the caves. Researchers in 2007 with the Israel Antiquities Authority found that the textiles are all made of linen, probably from recycled clothing. It may have been the Essenes, a sect of Jews obsessed with ritual purity, who wrote many of the scrolls while living in Qumran. They were known for wearing simple textiles of linen, while elsewhere they wore clothing made of wool. This all may sound very confusing, and it kind of is. The main takeaway here is that we still don't know exactly which group wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls, but it was probably a mixture of both Jewish refugees and residents of Qumran. They may even have worked together in a secret attempt to compile all the knowledge they had and hide it before the Romans could destroy it. Egyptian Scarab Amulet. Archaeologists in Israel were shocked when a group of hikers in the Negev desert discovered a small scarab amulet from ancient Egypt. According to antiquity experts in Israel, the very tiny amulet can be traced back to Egyptian worshippers of the sun god Ra. This is actually the very first time such an artifact has been found in the Israeli desert. Other treasures have been found before, but usually along the Mediterranean coast, and never like this. The scarab amulet was dated by experts with the Israel Antiquities Authority back to around the 9th century BC, over 2,000 years before the birth of Jesus. Amulets like this one were used by ancient Egyptians for centuries, normally fashioned into the form of a scarab or a dung beetle. Ancient Egyptians believed the scarab was a physical manifestation of Ra, the creator god. The amulet symbolized both daily rebirth and the morning sun. Because of its religious significance, the scarab amulet became wildly popular amongst Egyptians. And like anything that gets extremely popular, neighboring nations also began wearing the amulets. Think of scarab amulets being similar to necklaces with crosses on them today. Sure, a lot of people may wear them for religious reasons, but a lot of people like them just because of the shape and they're popular. It would have been the same 4,000 years ago. Someone may have been wearing this amulet all the way in Israel, perhaps not even knowing the true meaning behind it when they lost it in the desert. Mysterious ancient tombs. Ancient tombs have revealed an old highway network in Arabia dating back 4,500 years. Archaeologists working with the University of Western Australia have figured out that people who lived in northwest Arabia built incredibly long funerary avenues. These avenues were flanked on either side by thousands upon thousands of burial monuments. The avenues linked oases and pastures, allowing people to move easily from one place to another thousands of years before the Romans ever showed up and built their roads. It's really the age of the structures that's so impressive. All across the Arabian Peninsula, advanced societies and forgotten kingdoms were building hundreds of miles of highway to connect their most important sites. And the one way they thought to mark their avenues was by creating tombs on their edges. Archaeologists have identified at least 11,000 pendant tombs alongside the old roads. And because almost all the roads seem to be focused around permanent water sources, it's believed they use them to move herds of domestic animals from one watering hole to another during periods of rain. When looking at the region as a whole, scientists say it is the densest funeral landscape anywhere on the planet. And yet, because it's in Saudi Arabia, very little research has been done. It's a sad thing considering human history in the area goes back at least 200,000 years. Who knows what else could be hiding in Saudi Arabia? What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. The Burnt City. The Burnt City in Iran is by far one of the most mysterious archaeological sites in the world. This city has been associated with at least 4 different rises of civilization, yet each one of them abandoned the city after it burned down, following a series of catastrophic fires. It's located today at the ancient junction of what was a Bronze Age trading route across the Middle East. All kinds of fascinating relics have been found here, from human figurines to animal statues, clay tablets, and shattered pieces of pottery. And so far, only about 5% of the city has been excavated. Most of it is still unexplored, but local archaeologists lack the time and funds to research it properly. Yet even at only 5%, we know a lot about the city. For example, one of the excavation teams recovered the remains of a prehistoric monkey that had been kept in a cage. Based on studies of the monkey's skeleton, they believe it was a pet held captive, then buried inside a beautifully ornate container after it died. Clearly, the city had commercial relations with civilizations as far away as Central Asia. Of course, we still don't know everything about this city. It was founded in 3200 BC, then forsaken and forgotten by 1800 BC. But between that, there were at least 4 main periods of occupation that each saw a disastrous end. The first hybrid animal. A new study has revealed that Bronze Age bioengineers managed to create the very first hybrid animal. They probably didn't realize they were bioengineers at the time. Yet these ancient people still managed to create a horse-like monster called a kunga. It had a donkey for a mother and a Syrian wild ass for a father. It lived 4,500 years ago and was used for pulling war wagons into battle, for towing royal vehicles in parades, and for anything else that needed a bit of muscle. But here's the thing. Archaeologists were baffled by the portrayals of this powerful animal seen in art and texts from ancient Mesopotamia. They had no idea what the animal was because domestic horses didn't arrive in the region until much later. Then, finally, archaeologists stumbled upon the remains of the mysterious animal at a burial complex in northern Syria. They analyzed the teeth and bones of the animal and found it was a mix between a donkey and an extinct Syrian onager. This proved to be the earliest physical evidence of a hybrid animal being bred by humans from 2 different species. Talk about an incredible discovery! Canadian Stonehenge. Iniskim Umapi was built by ancient indigenous people in Canada hundreds and hundreds of years ago. Archaeologists refer to this mysterious place as the Canadian Stonehenge, although others call it a simple medicine wheel. No matter which way you look at it, this ancient structure is one of the oldest religious monuments anywhere on the planet. Perhaps even more fascinating is the fact that local indigenous people in Alberta are still visiting the monument to make spiritual offerings. The medicine wheel is located far from civilization, on a barren hill in the middle of nowhere. It consists of a middle cairn and 28 stone lines extending from it. It looks like a very large sun made of rock. The Blackfoot tribe named it Iniskim Umapi, which translates roughly to Buffalo Calling Stone Sacred Site. When the Europeans found it, they named it the Majorville Medicine Wheel after the nearby post office. It's true that there are plenty of medicine wheels scattered across the northern plains, all the way from Wyoming into Saskatchewan, but this is the oldest one known to archaeologists. Studies have estimated it being at least 5,000 years old. That means it was built at around the same time as Stonehenge. It's actually just as mysterious as Stonehenge, since nobody has been able to prove what it was originally used for. Nonetheless, Indigenous people continue to seek the wheel today in hopes of healing everything from anxiety and depression to other ailments. An ancient church. Archaeologists were shocked to discover an ancient church during construction in Buckinghamshire. The church was built sometime after the Norman conquest of 1066. This was when England was invaded by the Normans, the Bretons, and the Flemish. There were also some French troops there under the leadership of the Duke of Normandy. The Normans were successful in their invasion, and they took London. The Duke of Normandy was then crowned King of England and became William the Conqueror. Norman laws were introduced, castles were built, and churches were constructed as well. And so it was that the Church of St. Mary's was founded in the year 1080. Sadly for the church, it fell into ruin and was eventually demolished in the 19th century. Then, 1,000 years after it was originally built, a new railway line commissioned by the government caused it to be dug up. A team of archaeologists had to dig up graves and thousands of artifacts to get to the bottom of the church's mysterious history. The biggest mystery, according to lead archaeologist Dr. Rachel Wood, is that the church was built in the middle of an unoccupied field, nowhere near any kind of civilization. And even more confounding, the team discovered 3,000 skeletons and evidence of activity from the Iron Age, the Bronze Age, and the Roman period. The exact position of the church seems to be some kind of mysterious holy site, and has been for thousands of years. The church built after the Norman conquest was only the most recent structure. It was built on the bones of a Roman structure, which was built on the bones of an even older structure. Yet no one has yet discovered what made this seemingly insignificant plot of land so important to ancient people. The missing link. A strange skeleton found in a crater in Germany might just change the entire history of humanity. It was found to be the skeleton of an ancient human ancestor that could be the missing link between humans and apes. This small potential ancestor lived approximately 47 million years ago and was a monkey-like creature with a long tail, short arms, opposable thumbs, and eyes positioned on the front of its face. The creature would have looked extremely human except for the really long tail. But what's really interesting is that according to scientists led by Professor Jorn Hurum, a fossil expert from Norway, the creature seemed to be in the middle of a change. The creature may have had a tail and several other monkey-like features, but it was also missing some key elements shared with other monkeys at the time. It didn't have any grooming claws. It also didn't have the row of lower teeth called the tooth comb. This shows one of the very first examples of a monkey wandering away from its family tree and becoming a little more human. In other words, the fossil has proved to be a snapshot of one very specific time in our evolution. The skeleton has now been called Ida by professionals, and it gives a glimpse back to a time when the world was changing. Dinosaurs had recently gone extinct, the Himalayas were just starting to become mountains, and mammals the likes of which the Earth has never seen again were roaming vast jungles. Ida was one of these fascinating creatures. If scientists could just find more fossilized examples of other animals like Ida, we may finally be able to reveal the full story of human evolution and change history forever. The worst disaster in history. Scientists may have finally discovered the very worst natural disaster in the history of humanity. A massive volcanic eruption that occurred in the Mediterranean Sea region 3,600 years ago. It may have directly contributed to the collapse of the Minoan culture on the Greek island of Santorini, an advanced civilization that many believe could have been the beginning of the legend of Atlantis. And while historians were already pretty certain that a natural disaster wiped the Minoans out, new information has brought to light just how devastating the disaster really was. The volcanic eruption likely created a giant tsunami, the likes of which humans have never seen since. One so destructive that it literally destroyed every community along the coastline of the entire Mediterranean at the time. Archaeologists in Turkey found physical evidence of the disaster in the form of a human skeleton. This skeleton was found in a field of debris left behind by the ancient tsunami. At the dig site in Turkey, archaeologists were baffled by a layer of ash sediment that seemed to cover everything. They were unable to make sense of it until they stepped back to look at the big picture, realizing that the ash sediment was from the volcanic eruption that happened hundreds of miles away in Greece. They were then able to piece together just how huge the tsunami was. It was so big that it even decimated areas on the western coast of Turkey, killing whoever the skeleton belonged to and trapping them for almost 4,000 years. The Helmets of Vixel. In 1942, archaeologists stumbled upon a pair of horned helmets in a peat bog near the small Danish town of Vixel. At the time, they assumed these were Viking helmets. Each one has curved horns fashioned in the style of a bull, with two large domes like eyes. They look exactly like what you would expect the Vikings to wear into battle, and have often been used to represent Vikings in movies and cartoons. But a recent study has revealed that they actually weren't Viking helmets at all, but from a different civilization 1,500 years before the Vikings ever even appeared in the region. Researchers now believe the helmets were imported from somewhere in the Mediterranean, perhaps from as far away as Sardinia or western Iberia. They likely weren't worn in battle, but as part of mysterious religious rituals. They were also perhaps put into the peat bog as offerings to whichever gods these unknown people worshipped. And that's not all. The archaeologists who did the study, experts with Aarhus University in Denmark, were able to date the helmets to 900 BC. Judging by the elaborate style in which they were made, they were crafted by ancient Sardinian artisans. This means there must have been an ancient trade route going all the way from the Mediterranean to Scandinavia. This is unprecedented because it suggests traders were moving across a huge swath of land nearly 3,000 years ago, going all the way through the treacherous Alps on foot just to trade with remote tribes. It shows that ancient societies in Europe may have had way more contact with one another than historians ever imagined, explaining why there is so many cultural similarities across the continent. The Magic of Stonehenge. A handful of scraps and pieces of blackened wood from the first excavation of Stonehenge in over 4 decades might just change history. These scraps are pieces of stone chips discovered by archaeologists and are physical evidence of the local belief in the healing power of the magical blue stones. These stones were brought 150 miles from Wales to England to be used at Stonehenge. Today, we know the stone as spotted dolerite. At the time they were dug out of the ground, the stones would have been dark blue and spotted with bright specks of white quartz. When these stones were first taken to Stonehenge, they would have made the site far more mystical looking than it is today. The megalithic structure would have been glowing from the bright blue stones, making it truly look like some kind of mystical shrine. Not much is left of the blue stones today. The blue stones were all broken or bashed into many fragments, with the only surviving pieces being stumps buried underground. The recent discovery of bluestone fragments proves that after Stonehenge was abandoned, the locals still believed the bluestones held power. They broke them apart and then took fragments to use as personal healing talismans. This was probably around the year 2300 BC. It's just another piece of the mystery of Stonehenge, a history that always seems to be changing with every new find. The oldest family tree. In a tomb dating back to the Stone Age, scientists have discovered the oldest family tree. They did it by analyzing ancient DNA taken from the bones and teeth of 35 people buried at the Hazelton North Long Cairn in England. This group lived sometime around 3700 BC, or 5,700 years ago. DNA analysis has shown that 27 of them were close biological relatives, related to one another through 5 continuous generations of breeding. To put it more simply, most of the people buried in the tomb were all descendants from just 4 women who had children with 1 man. People like to joke about the story of Adam and Eve, asking that if they were the only 2 people on Earth, then who did their children have children with? And to be honest, this is kind of what the Adam and Eve situation would have looked like in real life. Almost 6,000 years ago, we see how an entire family of 5 generations stemmed from just a single man having children with 4 women. It goes to show how humans managed to breed so quickly, propagating through groups arranged like other mammal species. It's also a little shocking because it proves how closely related we all are. You can joke all you want that we all came from just 2 people, but this newest study is proof that we may very well have evolved from just a small handful of ancient humans thousands of years ago. Ancient Egyptian burial plots. Archaeologists in Egypt discovered a series of tombs near the Giza pyramids dating back to the 4th Dynasty, sometime around 2575 BC. These tombs were discovered on the edges of the modern capital of Cairo. 4,000 years ago, they were used to bury the people who worked on building the Great Pyramids. Experts are now saying this is evidence that slaves didn't build the pyramids like historians have been saying for decades, but rather skilled workers who were given proper burials. In fact, this discovery has changed everything we know about the workers who built the pyramids. Amihai Mazar, a professor with the Institute of Archaeology at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, says the entire myth came about thanks to an ancient Greek historian. The historian, Herodotus, described the pyramid builders as slaves. This myth was then passed along and became history by the Old Testament book of Exodus, which describes the Egyptians enslaving the children of Israel. In modern times, Hollywood has propagated the myth even further. But in reality, it seems the pyramids were actually built by a labor force loyal to the pharaohs. These people were paid for the construction, they were respected for their work, and when they died, they were buried in their very own tombs, not far from the pyramids themselves. Big shout out to Fairy Rot and Haley Laundry. Thanks so much for spending time with us, and if you are new here, welcome! And remember to subscribe before you go for more videos like these. Africa's technological genius. For the first several million years of human existence, as we evolved from the mysterious primates into the creatures we are today, we didn't have much in the way of technology. About 3 million years before now, our ancestors in Africa began to make extremely crude tools by chipping pieces of stone and rock. That went on for about 1 million years. Then, extremely primitive humans learned how to make hand axes. That was a great step forward in our tool-making abilities. 1 million years later, fire was mastered by people living in African caves. This was a big one, and it led to a technological acceleration that saw spear points, axes, beads, bows, arrows, and all kinds of useful tools and even jewelry coming into existence some 500,000 years ago. This technological revolution in Africa changed history. A new study is also changing how we view ancient history. Whereas most people may assume the technological revolution of 500,000 years ago was the work of groups of people coming together and pooling their intelligence, that may not be the case. Experts have suggested that it may have been a few clever people who created the biggest inventions in history. Plus, most of them weren't even human yet. Seeing how far back the most important inventions go, most were probably created by extremely primitive sapiens before we came into shape. So, the next time you use a lighter to light a candle, remember it wasn't even a human being who harnessed the first flame. The first bow and arrow was put together by one of our primitive ancestors living in a dimly lit cave. Fixing for ayahuasca. Researchers with the University of California, Berkeley have discovered traces of a very powerful hallucinogenic potion in a leather bundle from 1,000 years ago. They found the bundle buried in a cave in the Bolivian Andes. The pouch itself was made from fox snouts sewn together, with chemical analysis showing that there had been at least 5 psychoactive substances inside the pouch when it was abandoned in the cave. These substances include DMT and harmine, both key ingredients in the mind-altering substance known as ayahuasca. According to Melanie Miller, an archaeologist involved in the study, this is the first direct evidence that South American cultures combine different medicinal plants to create a more powerful substance. Hallucinogenic substances have been used by ancient people for a long time, but this changes history by pushing back how long ago they were using them. It also shows that the use of substances like ayahuasca was widespread throughout different South American societies. The bundle itself was found at an elevation of 13,000 feet in southwestern Bolivia, in a barren mountain wasteland occupied by nothing but llamas and alpacas. But from between 550 to 950 AD, the region was populated by the Tiwanaku civilization, and apparently they made use of the drug, either for ritual or recreational purposes. Ancient human relative. An international team of scientists have discovered lower back fossils from an ancient human relative right between ape and human. It's one of the most impressive discoveries in recent memory, and it's changing up what we know about our own evolution. So Ida, that I told you about earlier, goes back to 47 million years ago. This one is from 2 million years ago, showing an extinct human relative that had much more in common with us humans alive today. The scientists found new lumbar vertebrae from the lower back of one individual, a species of ancient human called Australopithecus sediba. They also found portions of vertebrae from a different early hominid. These turned out to be the most complete lower backs ever found from a human species this old. These discoveries were made in 2015 at the site of Malapa. This is in the Cradle of Humankind World Heritage Site in South Africa. The back fossils have revealed the shocking transition between swinging from branch to walking upright as human beings. 2 million years ago, these creatures were going through biological changes. We can see from their spines that they were still able to climb like apes, yet they could also walk somewhat upright just like modern humans. It's direct proof that evolution doesn't happen overnight, but it did happen gradually, with our earliest ancestors walking shakily on 2 legs while still able to climb trees much like apes. Over the next few millennia, they would leave the trees behind completely to walk on their feet. Collapse of Chinese dynasties. A new study has revealed a link between volcanic eruptions and the destruction of nearly 100 ancient Chinese dynasties. When researchers looked at the records of volcanic explosions over the last 20 centuries, they discovered that 62 out of 68 Chinese dynasties collapsed immediately after a big eruption. Researchers came to this conclusion by comparing elevated sulfate levels in ice core samples from Greenland and Antarctica against dates from the past 2,000 years, when a Chinese dynasty fell apart. This changes our view of history because before the study, historians attributed the dynastic rises and falls to things like moral decay, weak rulers, and widespread corruption. But in reality, it may have actually been volcanoes that caused things like drought and cold to ravage Chinese lands, bringing down dynasties like the Tang in 907, the Yuan in 1368, and even the Ming in 1644. Thanks for watching! Remember to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos like these. See you next time! Bye!